Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
SNP leader Nicola Sturgeon could not have been clearer. She fought last month's election in Scotland on a manifesto which said explicitly that a vote for Brexit would lead her to seek a second referendum on independence. She is determined Scotland should stay in the EU. But overnight there are reports that Brussels isn't going to make life easy for her. The First Minister joins me now from Glasgow. Good morning to you, First Minister.
Good morning, Andrew.
Can I ask, first of all, is it your priority to have a negotiation as Scotland with Brussels to allow Scotland to more or less seamlessly stay inside the EU?
My short answer to that is yes, but let me perhaps expand on the position that I find myself in. You know, the first thing I should say is I didn't want to be in this position this weekend. I hoped very much and campaigned to help persuade people across the UK to stay in the EU, but obviously people in England have voted differently to people in Scotland. Scotland voted overwhelmingly to remain a member of the European Union. So, you know, my challenge now as First Minister is to work out how I best protect Scotland's interests, how I try to prevent us being taken out of the EU against our will, with all of the deeply damaging and painful consequences that that will entail. Now, you know, independence is not my starting point in this. Protecting Scotland's interest is my starting point. But if it is the case that looking again at the question of independence becomes the only way in which we can protect Scotland's interests, then that is a debate and a conversation and a decision that the people of Scotland have a right to take over the next period. But in all of this, it's about protecting Scotland's interests. And the last point I would make is this. If we do find ourselves in the position of looking again at the independence question, this is not going to be a rerun of the 2014 referendum. The context and the circumstances have changed dramatically. The UK that Scotland voted to remain within in 2014 doesn't exist anymore. And this is a case of how do we best protect the stability and the interests of Scotland.
So you would like to be Prime Minister of an independent country, but you're First Minister of a country that is not independent. So how can you lead a delegation, as it were, to Brussels and argue for Scotland's interests while Scotland is still inside the UK?
The reality is,
can you do
Andrew,
that?
Well, I'm certainly going to seek to do that. The reality is we're in unprecedented territory here. You know, I've heard people over the last couple of days talk about the rules that will apply to the Article 50 process. The reality is there are no rules, there is no precedent. This is something that's never been done before. What will happen from here on in will be a matter of negotiation. Now, my challenge, but also my responsibility as First Minister, is to seek to negotiate to protect Scotland's interests. Now, I, therefore,
Have you spoken to anyone yet in Brussels about this?
Look, I will be speaking to people in Brussels over the next few days. I haven't done that yet. You know, we're in a period of only a couple of days since this vote happened. But my priority is to seek to protect Scotland's interests in uncharted territory, and that's going to be my guiding principle. Now, are there challenges for Scotland in this? Of course there are, but what I want to do is have an open, honest conversation with people in Scotland about how we best lead this country forward.
There are two options in terms of the way forward as regards Brussels. One, you have a successful negotiation with Brussels, which allows Scotland, as it were, to stay inside the UK and then at the time of Brexit to move more or less seamlessly back into the EU. That's option one. That seems to be being turned down by people in Brussels today. If they turn it down, then you have to go into the queue to join as a new independent country. Which would you prefer?
Look, there are a number of options that are potentially open here. I'm not going to be rushed into saying this is the best option or that's the best option. I don't think it is the case to say that anybody in Brussels has turned anything down. If you're talking about a story in the Mail on Sunday today, I don't think it will surprise anybody in Scotland to see the Mail on Sunday pour cold water on our democratic aspirations. It's what they do. But the substance of that story goes back to the point I made earlier on, appears to be, you know, here are the rules that will apply with the Article 50 process. There are no rules, there is no precedent. So my job over the coming days, weeks and months is to get in there and to seek to discuss and negotiate the best way forward for Scotland. And I'm going to do that in a way that, as far as possible, tries to unify people in Scotland behind what is in our best interests. You
are still part of the UK at the moment. There are suggestions from the Leave campaigners that they want Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland to be part of the UK-wide delegation to go to Brussels to discuss the terms of exit. Would you be part of that, or would you think that was ridiculous?
I will do everything to protect Scotland's interests, but let me be clear, Scotland voted to stay in the European Union. We made it very clear. It's more than 60% of people across Scotland voted to stay. Every single local authority area in Scotland voted to stay. It was overwhelming, it was emphatic. So of course, in every eventuality, my priority is to protect Scotland's interests, but my starting point here is to protect Scotland's interests within the European Union, because this is not just a matter of principle. What is going to happen? No, this is important. What's going to happen with the UK is that there are going to be deeply damaging and painful consequences of the process of trying to extricate the UK from the EU. I want to try and protect Scotland from that. I don't want to see the damage done to our economy, to our society, to our culture, to our place in the world that will come from this. My job is to try to protect us from that.
Back at the time of the 2014 referendum, one of the problems the Yes campaign had was over the currency. Presumably that is now, that you can't share the pound with a UK that's outside the EU while being in the EU. You would have to go for the euro now, wouldn't you?
No, I don't think that's the case, but let me try and take this step by step. Firstly, and this comes back to the point I made, we're in very different circumstances to those that pertained in 2014. And one of the important differences is, in a sense, and I know this might initially sound a bit odd, but this would not be a decision about Scotland leaving anywhere. This would actually be a decision about Scotland staying, and therefore the moral argument about us retaining the current terms that we have would be even stronger than in 2014. But the second point is this.
Coming back to the currency, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, okay. But on the currency or any other issue, I am not saying here just now that there are not questions and challenges that Scotland would have to face up to. I'm not going to be rushed in today to giving definitive answers in that, because as a country we've got to work through what these issues are. But the point that I think is very important is that as we do this, that 2014, I was convinced in 2014 that independence was best for Scotland, but understandably some people in Scotland saw it as a choice between a step into the unknown with independence and the security and the stability, the known quantity of the UK.
Sorry to jump
That's not the case just now.
But that is why Scotland's continued membership of the EU is so important, isn't it? That's why Scotland's continued membership of the EU is so critical. My point is that if you can't get back in again, as it were, until the UK has left, which seems the likelier thing at the moment.
Well, hold on a second, Andrew. There is no sense. Well, no, I don't, because we're in uncharted territory right now. For anybody to say right now, it's the likely option that Scotland would have to sort of wait to get back in. The whole point here is that our argument is that we don't want to leave. It's not that we want to leave and get back in. We want to stay.
So you need that voice to be heard while you are still part of the UK. How do you go about doing that? Have you assembled a delegation to go there? Have you got any timetable? Who do you intend to speak to?
Well, I intend to. I've set this out. The Scottish Cabinet met yesterday, and again, in what I'm saying here, I'm not suggesting for a second that the path ahead is without complexity or it's easy. The Scottish Cabinet has decided and made very clear that in the days, weeks and months to come, we are going to seek discussions with the European Union institutions, with other member states, to explore all options for giving effect to the democratic will of the Scottish people. That's how I'm going to proceed. And my guiding principle is the best interests of Scotland and protecting what Scotland voted for.
There is one other thing, clearly you all have to think about, which is that if Scotland is a member of the EU and England isn't, there then has to be a border, doesn't there? A proper border with controls and checks and all of that.
Well, whatever happens with Scotland, this issue of a border is going to have to be resolved in the context of Ireland, of course. And some of these issues that would arise for Scotland, not all of them I accept, but some of these issues that would arise for Scotland in these circumstances arise anyway in the Irish context and are going to have to be resolved. So, these are issues that are live. I certainly don't want to see in any circumstances a border between Scotland and England. Whatever happens here, England is our nearest neighbour and will always, I hope, be our best friend. But these are circumstances in which Scotland hasn't chosen to be. Well, no, I'm not prepared at this stage.
You may have to go into a referendum. Sorry, you may have to go into a referendum saying the currency is the euro and there will be a border with England, and that's going to be tough for you.
I think you're jumping several steps ahead of where I'm not prepared. We are in uncharted territory.
I'm a young gazelle. That's what I do.
We're in uncharted territory, Andrew. Not because of choices Scotland has made, because of choices that have been made elsewhere, and I'm not prepared at this stage to just accept that certain things are inevitable. I have a job to do to protect Scotland and to negotiate the best way forward for Scotland. Now, I look on at what's happening in Westminster just now with a sense of utter despair on behalf of people across England and other parts of the UK as that vacuum of leadership, both in the Tories and Labour, develops. But what I'm absolutely clear about, there's no vacuum of leadership in Scotland. As First Minister, I'm going to do everything I possibly can to prevent Scotland being taken out of the European Union, because the consequences of allowing us to be so will be devastating.
We're now out of time. I want you to answer this question, if you wouldn't mind, very, very quickly. We're going to get a new Conservative Prime Minister. What happens if that Prime Minister says to you, Nicola Sturgeon, you had a referendum in 2014, I will not allow you to have another one now?
Well, I just think people in Scotland would find that completely unacceptable if we were in the situation where the Scottish Parliament had voted for a second referendum because it saw it as the best way. Look, again, I don't think it is acceptable in the context we find ourselves in of anybody trying to dictate to Scotland the terms of how we seek to take the country forward. It's simply not acceptable, and I would caution any future Prime Minister against putting themselves in that position.
Nicola Sturgeon, thank you very much for talking to us this morning.
I've been getting away with it all